So hello everyone, welcome to the Lockdown Videocast /podcast. I hope you're all staying well and staying safe. This week, I'm really honoured to be joined by Dr Margaret Casely Hayford. Thank you very much for joining me, Dr Margaret. Dr Margaret, I'll give you some introductions if you don't mind. So Dr Casely Margaret Hayford is the Chancellor of Coventry University. She spent the best part of her career at law firm Dentons, becoming the first Black partner at any city law firm at the time. She's chair of international development charity Action Aid UK, a co-op board member, and co-manages rap artist Kevin Colt. Do you still do that? Was that a period of time that you used to manage him, or still do that now?
I just mentored him. He's being managed by a very able full-time manager who's also a woman.
Okay.
Called Linia, and she's excellent. But we keep very much in contact and very much watching his career. The other thing that I just need to amend slightly or update is that I finished my term as chair of Action Aid UK, and I'm chair of Shakespeare's Globe.
Oh, of course, right. Okay, so you that came to a conclusion what last year or this year or
last year? Yeah.
Last year. Okay. So chair of Shakespeare's Globe. Okay, so and then obviously I should mention that you spent quite a long time as director of legal services at John Lewis, was a non-executive director of NHS England. Studied at Oxford University. I mean, I don't want to get this wrong. You studied jurisprudence,
yes, which is basically the philosophy of law, really.
Okay, interesting. I hadn't actually heard that, so I did have to look it up, and it sounds like an interesting course. I'm sure we'll touch on that as we make our way through. So yeah, for the viewers watching, Dr. Margaret has a whole plethora of very interesting, successful roles and moments, and I'm sure she'll have a lot of interesting things to share with you all. So, firstly, during lockdown, how have you been? Have you been well, keeping safe?
Yes, thank you for asking. Yes, basically, because I'm technically retired. I mean, I retired in 2014. So from 2014, I started to work from home, although I do have a number of roles, as I said, as you quite rightly said. I was chair of Action Aid UK, and now I'm chair of Shakespeare's Globe, and I'm also on the board of the co-op, and I mentor numbers of young entrepreneurs, and an awful lot of that can be done from my study at home.
Yeah.
And so to a large extent, lockdown for me hasn't been dramatically different. I mean, I did go out to board meetings, been hosting the board meetings at home on Zoom, as everybody else has. So that's meant that I've had to be a little bit more disciplined about making myself go out for exercise and so on, and then not tripping over members of the family who are at home. Well, essentially, there are only three of us. It's my husband and my daughter. We're lucky enough to have enough space in the house to be able to get away from each other if we're working individually, and then sort of get back together again in the normal way that families do, and walk the dog. And so it's all been it's been like a sort of extended holiday in some respects, in that we're all together, but then we're disciplined about our work because we've all got work to do. And so it's been fine. I've just been in my head really worried about other people who are in situations in which they can't go out easily to an open space, stuck in a single room. How oppressive must that be? So it'd be great that it's now the rules are slightly less stringent and people can get out, which is great news.
Yeah, for sure. But no, it's good to hear that you've been keeping well.
But then on a professional basis, advising the different organisations I'm involved with has been really interesting, because we've gone from because I'm on the board of the co-op, the retail side of the co-op, having to accommodate, first of all, people panic buying. So we had sort of a year-on-year 50% increase in that first week of lockdown in terms of what people were buying, which is just incredible, and having to deal with that. Then having to deal with the lockdown situation and making sure that people were, the colleagues in stores were properly protected, that people were socially distancing within the stores, that we were managing to get the distribution network to cope with the people panic buying. It's been really, really fascinating to watch how quickly my colleagues have mobilized themselves into being this brilliant, well-oiled machine, and at the same time trying to keep people safe. And then we run the funeral side, which, as you can imagine, sadly, has had an enormous amount to do in really difficult circumstances. And then with the Globe, we can't obviously open the theatre, so we moved to online performances, which have been amazingly well subscribed to. And it's been great watching the figures rise. And that first week when we did Hamlet, I got very excited, and I said to the board, we've had 8,000 views, normally, that's so much more with that capacity of our theatre. And by the end of that day, we'd had 100,000 views. Wow. By the time we finished the run, it was just close on 500,000. Wow. We've had, I think, close on 2 million views for the subsequent performances that we've uploaded. So clearly people are really excited about being able to access, and it means that people are accessing from all over the world. So even though we can't get people in, we are trying to make sure that we give them links to ourselves and what we can do. It's going to be really, really difficult to accommodate people in the theatres. We have got one open air theatre. We run 2 theatres. Mm-hmm. Little Wanamaker Playhouse is like a traditional, I suppose you could describe it as a sort of a Jacobean little theatre with candlelight and so on, but it's enclosed. Mm-hmm. Very, very difficult to run that feasibly with people socially distancing. Mm-hmm. But with the larger theatre, because we're open air, it might be that some of the relaxations that have been allowed for sporting activities might be allowed for us. We don't know, we're still in discussion with government, but the big thing is just because we get no subsidy, state subsidy, the big issue for us is how on earth do we keep going once our reserves are spent. So we've been doing our best to try to modify cost, even though we've got fixed overheads. So, there are different challenges for the different organisations that I'm involved with. So the meetings have been very, very interesting, getting people to think differently, working with colleagues in different ways, try to reprioritise. It's been fascinating, and worrying in equal measure, but really, really interesting to see how well people rise to the different challenges. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And it's been a privilege to work with people with such dedication and talent, frankly.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's really interesting because clearly, it is a difficult time, for businesses and for individuals in their own measure. So that's interesting to understand, both from the retail perspective and from the arts perspective, how, both industries have had to really adapt to the time. So yeah, and I'm sure we'll touch on that more at some point. So Dr. Margaret, if you don't mind, let's go back to you growing up and at school and just before you arrived at the University of Oxford. Talk to me about your interest in law. Is this something that started pretty early on? Or what was the spark, I suppose, that happened that made you want to go to Oxford and then specifically want to study anything to do with the legal side of things?
To be honest, I don't think it was a spark. I think it was more an expectation, because I come from a line of lawyers, and my grandfather had started chambers in Accra. My father's older brother went into the chambers. My father would have gone into the chambers had he stayed in the law, but he requalified and became an accountant, which is why he stayed here in the UK, because basically he'd broken the line in the tradition, so to speak. but and my parents were um, they were generously spirited in the way they talked to us as children. So around the dining table, we talked about politics, we talked about our own background as an African family, and because of the lineage on both sides, we knew more of our heritage than many African people do. And so to know that there was in the family journalism, there was the commercial enterprise, there was political activism, there was law, was something that I've known, since I was just, a toddler. So to an extent, the idea of going into the law wasn't a sort of flashbang, oh my goodness, I'll do that. It was something that was always in the back of my mind. But I really wanted to be a ballet dancer. I love the arts. And the idea of dance was just, my dream. And so for quite a while, I just sort of pushed the law to the back of my mind. And I used to do dance classes at the dance centre in Covent Garden. And even immediately after leaving school, I just didn't want to go to university, and I wanted to be a dancer. So, but at the same time, you could see I was sort of hedging my bets, because to pay for my dance classes, I worked in the legal department of the Greater London Council and Kensington and Chelsea Council, and so it was always in the back of my mind, that sort of building up that experience and trying to think, where will I end up? Because obviously that a dance career is not going to last forever. But in fact, mine never took off, because there was a wonderful moment when, perhaps this is the flash. I was on a train and reading a book, and somebody asked me what I was reading, and we got chatting, and she said, what do you do? And I explained that I wanted to be a dancer, and I said, but I get the impression that my parents would not be very happy if I became a dancer. And she said, do you think that's preventing you from being a dancer? And I said, yeah, I think it probably is. And she said, no, I don't think it is. And I was amazed at this complete stranger telling me what she thought of my life. And I said, what do you mean? She said, no, she said, the only thing that's preventing you from doing what you want is you. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. And so I thought, well, why is it that I'm not just going, yes, I'm going to be a dancer? And then I thought more forcefully about it, or more sort of constructively about it, and thought, perhaps it is because I really do want to be a lawyer. Yeah. I see that as my thing. I see that as me. And at that stage, that was it. And so perhaps you're right. Perhaps there was a blinding flash, but from the woman on the train. So, woman on the train, thank you.
If you're watching, thank you. That's really, really interesting. I suppose not a conventional way of having a spark, but nevertheless, it's fascinating to hear. Okay, so that was the kind of spark moment. So it's quite interesting talking to individuals that have gone to Oxford, because some individuals definitely have a plan of going to study at the top university in the country. Others, not so much. And I feel as if it sometimes falls into place at the time. So for you, was Oxford always in your sights, or did it really just fall into place?
It is that point, isn't it? That people say, the moment you say, Oxford, people say it's a top university in the country. Sorry, Cambridge.
I'm going to get some abuse for that. We'll move to
it. So yeah, I just thought I'd just gone to heaven when Somerville accepted me, and it's one of the joys of my life that I was able to become part of an organisation that I respect so profoundly. And I really enjoyed my time at Somerville. I was recently made a fellow of Somerville, and I can't tell you how, goodness me, I mean, the only sadness about it is that my mother and father were not alive to see it. But for me, that's the highest accolade, apart from, I mean, it's the highest accolade from that university that I could possibly get, that I've been recognised by my alma mater is so wonderful. And I have to say that people do ask me, but you're Chancellor of Coventry University, what does that mean to you? That means so much to me, because I think that there is something really important about people recognising that there are different opportunities from different types of establishment, and Coventry adds so much to people's lives in what it does. It comes from a totally different background. It's incredibly pragmatic and practical about making sure that people get an education that is married to the outcome of employment, that's close to industry. It comes from a background that, Lancaster Polytechnic, that was close to manufacturing and supportive of manufacturing industry. It still works closely, very, very closely, with organisations like Jaguar Land Rover, and its life and sciences faculty is without comparison in terms of the practicality of the course, the way it turns people out who are ready to go on the front line. And at a time like this, you realise the importance of that. I am so proud to be Chancellor of Coventry. Yeah. So it isn't that, I think that the sort of tuition and support that you get at a university like Oxford is the be-all and end-all by any state of imagination. It is, there are different things that are offered by different types of institutions, and I highly recommend the sort of education that one would get at Coventry, which is why I'm thrilled to be their ambassador as Chancellor.
Yeah, and obviously biased, but I would second that. So no, but thank you for sharing those thoughts. I think it is interesting, because clearly, obviously, individuals will take their judgment about individuals that went to Oxbridge that then represent universities that aren't formal polytechnic institutions. But I'm sure we'll chat about that more. So okay, so good time at Oxford. Enjoyed it. Felt welcome. Felt that it was an institution that would help you get on. How was your time there?
Yes, to all of those points, really. I really enjoyed it. I was welcomed. I didn't feel other. And I know that there are people who find it very, very difficult, because they've come from backgrounds that mean that the environment is strange to them. And I think that it's, in a way, the pity is that there is still a difficulty for people from certain backgrounds, and I don't even think it's all down to are you black or are you white. I think it is much more, is this an environment that you feel comfortable in as an individual because you understand it? And as I said, because basically my family is a middle class family, because I went to a girls' day school, trust school. I was used to a school that had, our sixth form looked out on a quadrangle. There were things that were not alien to me that might have been alien to others. And I really understand why it's important for universities like Oxford and Cambridge to reach out and say to those people for whom it's going to be a really difficult transition, come in, let's help you have an easier journey, let's make you welcome. And there are numbers of initiatives now that are being promoted precisely for that purpose, like Target Oxbridge. And I'm really very, very keen and very supportive of those, because I think that what we shouldn't do is make it difficult for people even to walk through that door. So you've got people who are academically brilliant who
Yeah.
are still worried, or whose parents will say, oh my goodness, it's not for us, not for people like us. That's a tragedy. It's a tragedy not just for the individual and their family, it's also a tragedy for the university. You're losing out on some great brains because you're frightening them from coming in.
Yeah.
So let's get rid of that. So there, as I say, there are wonderful initiatives, and I'm very supportive. Somerville, St Anne's, and some of the other colleges have got really firmly behind helping schools that wouldn't otherwise have a close relationship that would enable their young people to even try for Oxbridge, to do so now, and running summer schools so that the young people can come in and just get a feel for it and not feel that it's alien. That's so important.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's important not just for universities that have that sort of rarefied atmosphere, also for professions that have a rarefied atmosphere. You're going to lose out on some mega brains. There are some incredible tech whiz kids who've come through and developed some brilliant concepts that you've all missed out on because you alienated them.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that people haven't yet well, I suppose they have just now cottoned on to the fact that they're missing out on mega brains, and by creating an environment that has a threshold that's difficult to cross. And then when people cross that threshold, then welcome them in. There is no merit in being a mediocre brain who's protected in their mediocrity by the fact that you've kept out bigger brains than yourself.
Yeah. It makes complete sense, and I think this is all really refreshing thoughts. And actually, I didn't know. It's really, really good to hear that there are certain colleges within Oxford that have specific programs to ensure that they can encourage individuals from a range of backgrounds to apply, because clearly, whether it's right or wrong, that probably needs to be done. Clearly, there are some things that put them off. So it's really, really good to hear that that's happening, and great to hear that you had a good time at Oxford. So, Dr. Margaret, after leaving Oxford,
by the way, you can call me Margaret. You don't have to call me.
Okay, can I? Fine, I'll call you Margaret. So Margaret, after leaving Oxford, Dentons was your first big law firm. I should just note, was there anything that you did before Dentons, just so I don't skip over anything? Or
yes, I worked for the Association of District Councils, because don't forget I had this background in local authority law.
Oh yeah.
And so it seemed to me that administrative law was particularly interesting, and I worked at the Association of District Councils, which is the body, the coordinating body for borough councils, and local government law is something that I think is really interesting, fascinating, and ignored by too many people who don't realise how much it touches and shapes our lives. But we can talk about that later, because it's something I feel really, really strongly about. And I'm so delighted that President Obama recently said, young people, do you realise that all the things that you find really difficult in your lives are shaped by those in government, not necessarily central government, but local government. And you should not just vote, you should challenge, you should try and influence. And he created a toolkit with letters, drafted templates specifically for that, because it's so important. So being at the ADC for me was really just part of a really important journey. And then going into that, in fact, what I did was I was actually at the administrative bar. I was at 4-5 Gray's Inn Square, because I'm duly qualified. I'm qualified as a barrister. And I went into 4-5 Gray's Inn Square, which was a set of chambers that actually focused on not just commercial, it had a commercial side, but also very, very much on the government law side, administrative law side. So there is a sort of theme there, thread. And And in fact, the thread went through to my going into Dentons, because I went into Dentons as a planning and development lawyer, which is a really important part. Planning is such an important part of the administrative system, because it's essentially shaping our lives, the way we're going to work, where are the houses going to go, how do you juxtapose that with the industry, the retail, the car parking, the infrastructure for the roads and so on. So much an important part of what makes life worth living is just how the planners permit, allow, support development to take place. So again, it was part of the same thread of being in an area that really shapes lives, and I just found it utterly fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and that's and
You don't sound convinced.
No, sorry. It is extremely interesting. So that's just my voice sometimes. No, but for sure, I understand the thread now, and I think there are a lot of young people that will be watching that are aspiring lawyers. So for them, that's going to be extremely interesting to understand why planning and development and local government, law is so fascinating to you and so important actually to our everyday life. And in fairness, I think lots of individuals probably do take for granted actually what happens on a local level, and focus so much not on the micro or local level, but on the macro in terms of like national government. So that's fascinating.
I'll give you a really, really small example. When I first went to Dentons, we did a lot of work for Sainsbury, who were one of our biggest clients. And in the 80s and 90s, there was a massive retail boom. And so Sainsbury began building bigger and bigger stores. And Sainsbury and Tesco were in a sort of race to build mega stores at one point out of town, because people's shopping habits changed from being very local to being really planning for the long future. So people would drive out to these mega stores and buy like 6 weeks worth of food and stick it in the freezer. And I think it's because there was a financial boom that meant that everyone focused on their work so much that you just had to get the shopping done in one fell swoop. And so you'd go out and you'd buy your food almost in bulk for the first time, and the stores got bigger and bigger, and they started to do more than just food. But in order to accommodate that, they had to have thousands of car parking spaces. For the first time, these schemes were being developed with huge fields of car parks. And I can remember in the early days, we at Dentons would say to our clients, well, the parking looks really bleak. It's just seas of cars. And it could do with some planting to soften it. And the local authority is probably likely to be much better disposed to the development. And the clients would say, well, that's just a cost. Why would we just add cost? And then they gradually realized that the schemes that had the planting with the softened car parking got through the planning much more easily, because the local authority would say, okay, yeah, that doesn't look too hostile. And after a short time, if we said to them, the team needs to have a landscape architect as well as an architect, they just said, yes, absolutely. And the cost was accommodated because they recognized that it created a better environment for the shoppers. It created a better dialogue with the local residents who were living close by something that looked much less hostile than it would otherwise. It created a better dialogue with the local authority, because the local authority, recognizing their relationship and responsibility to the residents, wouldn't be as hostile as they might otherwise be. That's what I mean by the power to shape. I mean, and that's a tiny example. Yeah. And if you're dealing with building roads, building power stations, building hospitals, the impact is just immense. So getting involved with at local government level is no small thing. It is massive. It impacts on all of our lives. Where are the hospitals going to be? Where are the police stations going to be? Is this the last bank in town? Should it be allowed to close? What impact will that mean for that little town?
Yeah.
And so on. Do you see what I mean?
No, for sure. And I really thank you for giving that example about Sainsbury's, because I actually think that clearly actually has a much wider impact than one would assume. So yeah, that's extremely interesting. So you spent, am I right in thinking, around about 18, 19 years at Dentons?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yes, indeed.
Okay. And obviously, really successful career at Dentons, rising up the ranks. And as I mentioned in the intro, becoming the first Black partner of Dentons, and not just Dentons, but any city law firm, Margaret. How did that make you feel? Because I know one can jump to conclusions to say that, you'd worked so hard and the promotion was coming and maybe you didn't feel that impactful. But actually, I'm quite keen to know how you felt when you were made partner, and whether you were told at the time actually the wider impact that you were making on other aspiring young Black female lawyers coming into the sector and you being promoted to partner. What did that mean to you at the time?
It's so funny. It's funny because I first of all, I didn't know that I was the first Black female partner in the city until the Law Society. Someone at the Law Society told me sometime afterward. It was a lot. To be honest, it was a long time in coming, and I almost. I almost gave up, but I think I was very much helped by my clients, who were incredibly supportive, and that was a real bonus. I think it's a sadness to me that people have had to keep on talking about this point that I was the first Black female partner. It's a sadness in so many ways. It's a sadness because it is a thing. It's a sadness also because I give talks to the Black Solicitors Network from time to time. And the most recent one was to a group of partners in city law firms. And it was a group of really talented young people. I mean, they were amazing. And I said to them, how many of you are one of many Black partners in your law firm? And there was only one person who had a colleague who was also a person of colour at that partner level. All the others were still the only Black partner. And I just thought, this is just an outrage. This is 20 years later, all that I went through, and it really was not easy, and I don't want to go into it. I just can't believe that things haven't changed and that people are still thinking they're taking a risk in bringing us on. We're no different from anybody else. Yeah. Many of us are talented. Some of us will be less talented. Some will need support. Some will become really high flyers who will fly almost without wings. We're the same as everybody else. There was a really interesting moment today on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme when they were talking about the post-George Floyd demonstrations, and some of the demonstrations have been violent and some of the demonstrations have been peaceful. And the interviewer asked the interviewee, and do you think that the violent protests have alienated ordinary people? And I just thought, how interesting that he should say that.
Yeah.
He doesn't see us as ordinary people. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We're just people. And I
Yeah.
don't want it to be a thing that I'm the first black anything. I'm the first woman anything. I mean, the thing about women in particular is completely ridiculous because we're 50% of the population. So why should it be extraordinary that we achieve as much as our male counterparts? It's a nonsense. It makes me very angry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can completely understand why you're so angry about it. And it's really, really interesting because obviously, you know, for someone like, so obviously we went to Coventry University and still to this day I have very close black friends that have gone into all walks of life, you know, banking, law, and the harsh reality is, speaking to them time and time again, they have faced unnecessary challenge around, you know, their background and nothing to do with their skill set and their merit. So I can understand why for you, you know, your point about why does it matter? And clearly, you know, the reason I brought it up is because clearly it is an accolade, but like you say, whether it should be you know, is it an accolade for the wrong reason? Should you just be made partner and that's a successful moment regardless of your skin color? And clearly for you, that's the point, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely the point. It should be that we're allowed to fail. The moment that I will know that we have got over a massive hurdle will be the point at which somebody makes a Horlicks and people don't think, oh my gosh, that's a problem with these people.
Yeah.
No, it is not a problem with these people if one person fails. If that person is just a failure in their own right, let's either help them not to be a failure, or let's move them on to something in which they will succeed, and let's bring in other people who might be much better and have greater talent. And it's a sadness that we're not seen as just people. It's an incredibly infuriating, ridiculous hurdle that because we have brown skin, we're seen as other. And if you challenge, you're aggressive. So, it was, again, a very interesting thing yesterday. John Boyega stood up at one of the protests and said how upset he was about the whole George Floyd situation, and then in passing said, oh my goodness, I don't know whether I'll ever work again after this.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's so tragic, because that is also the other cross that we have to bear, is that if we do call out anything that's wrong, it stands against us.
Yeah.
So you have to bear whatever it is in silence. And that means that the extent to which you can get any form of rectitude for anything that's wrong is so limited. And again, that's a nonsense. It should be that we can all say, this is actually not appropriate, or let's do it a different way that is far, is going to have far greater positive impact, without people thinking that's a career limiting statement to have made. Oh my goodness, be careful of so-and-so, she's a troublemaker. No, what they're trying to do is to help your organization to be better. How can that be a bad thing?
Yeah.
It's the fact that the most interesting thing for me is the fact that you've got frontline workers of color dying in huge numbers because nobody's asked themselves whether there might be too many people of color working in vulnerable positions, and if so, why? Or indeed whether they are under pressure for other reasons to question inadequacies, like inadequacies of protection equipment and so on, and they can't challenge. And, as they say in the airline industry, if people were not allowed to challenge what was wrong, there would be disaster. So the challenges are welcomed, and that should be the same in every industry.
Yeah.
So, Sorry, it's a bit of a massive bugbear of mine, because the injustices have huge consequences. Because one of the terrible sadnesses is the lockdowns worldwide were managing to flatten the peaks in COVID-19. The protestations worldwide, because of the injustices that people have seen, have brought people out on the street in huge numbers, in great proximity, but they're more likely to be vulnerable and might create mini spikes as a consequence. So the injustices have had huge impact. And this is the problem: injustice that you cannot deal with on a day-to-day basis doesn't just go away. It has massive, massive adverse impact that we should all be cognizant of. And, you know, when you're talking about the fact that it's going to leave us vulnerable to greater numbers of deaths, how bad can it be before one's allowed to talk about it?
Yeah.
I bet you wish you hadn't asked that question.
No, and you know what? Like, I think for a lot of my viewers, it's really going to be an interesting conversation for them. It's going to, like, it will definitely touch a nerve similar to the way it does with yourself, Margaret. I'm just interested to ask you. So when I was at JP Morgan, they had a lot of programs, like one called Bold, I think it was, Black Orientation Leadership Development Program, etc. And you know, lots of programs are put in place, which is, I suppose, a positive. The one conversation that comes up, which I want your thoughts on, is quotas. What are your thoughts on quotas? Because clearly there is an unconscious bias which can hold individuals of colour getting on in the legal sector and banking, etc., into those senior roles. Do you think that quotas is the solution? Or do you think that this really needs to start from an educational perspective much earlier, to ensure that people never get to a point where there's any unconscious bias when they're sitting in the room deciding who should be promoted and who shouldn't be promoted?
You've brought together two really important points. I'll deal with the last one first. Should there be training at an early stage that means that there will be no unconscious bias, that there will be no detriment to individuals as they move forward in their career? Absolutely. But the training should start when we're at school, and the training shouldn't just be a question of training about bias. It should be that the contributions of people of colour should be clear within history, because it is just not true, for example, that there were no people of colour fighting alongside the Allied forces in either World War I or World War II. But very few people know that. There were huge numbers, and there are so many examples of the eradication of people of colour from history that it means that people don't go into situations with confidence in their own ability. People don't go into situations in confidence that that black person walking in the room has ability. If we were visible in substantive education, the resilience in the individual would be greater, but also the impact of that in the way in which people would be welcomed into the business world, the working life, would be so different. So teaching needs to change in so many ways, but also teaching needs to be changed so that we have life skills, entrepreneurial skills that enable us all to be able to develop into the best person we can possibly be. And I mentor and advise a young man who started an organization called Ultra Education, which is completely wonderful in taking entrepreneurial skills and life skills, skills of teamworking, leadership, planning, marketing, business planning, into schools to children of primary age upwards, and in particular into deprived children's education, areas of deprivation. But it's not by any means limited to that. I mean, he goes into all sorts of schools. In fact, he's done a lot of work with some girls' day school trusts schools. Because, for example, Putney High has a very far-sighted principal, and he's actually resident lecturer to the girls there, who will come out as brilliant businesswomen as a consequence, I have no doubt. I think that those sorts of skills help people to become better in developing their own strength and resilience when they come out into the workplace. So that's the second part of your question. Mm-hmm. The first part of your question, I think, oh my goodness, in a way, we need to make sure that we can we can help businesses to move forward in a way that means that understanding people's capability and allowing to be their best self isn't a nice to have. It's a nonsense not to do it, because I mentioned earlier on that you're missing out on people with great potential, but also you might be investing in some people only to lose them later because they never feel welcome. Yeah. Or bringing them in to fail because they don't feel welcome. And this isn't just people of colour, this is anyone who feels disadvantaged by this situation. And I've seen scenarios in which people have met in an ante-room before a board meeting, and one cohort of directors regularly discussed the rugby together. And one person who doesn't know about and follow rugby is continually excluded from that pre-board discussion. When people go into the boardroom, the camaraderie that's developed already between the people who share that common bond is there and actually helps create a better engagement. And it's then harder for the other individual. And that plays out in all manner of different ways. It plays out in the way that men bring women into the conversation in the business world. Working class people who come from a background that means that they might not have had the same width of experience as others are welcomed into the business world. And if you can't feel that complete welcome, you're less likely to perform well. You're more likely to feel stress because you feel, oh my goodness, if this is going wrong, is it me? And not necessarily feel able to discuss it in the way you can with others. That stress has health impact, adverse impact, obviously. And so you're more likely to take time off sick from work or to perform less well, which is bad for the business. So there are all manner of reasons why the work that is done within the working environment needs to be more than a skeletal framework of inclusivity. And in particular, it shouldn't be left to a black network to sort out something for itself, because all that means is that when they get together, they can talk about what they feel is wrong. But if they can still not go out and, in the sense of John Boyega, make statements to the business about where they think improvements could be made, then you're losing out. You're losing out on something that could help the business to perform better. So it should be something that is within the business to help its community to perform better. And you haven't mentioned that I was at John Lewis as Director of Legal for the John Lewis Partnership for almost 10 years. And the John Lewis was founded by John Speed and Lewis, who was a visionary, who realised that if you give people a working environment in which they can be their best self, they will do well for the organisation. And it really isn't rocket science. It's just common sense, compassionate, sensible business planning. And so I really take my hat off to JP Morgan's bold initiative. And I know that they've tried very hard to make people feel welcome in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think that many businesses could learn from the B Corps about how to be better businesses. Sorry if that's a very, very long answer, but it was a very complicated and important question.
For sure. And I completely understand it. It is a complicated question, but I really thank you for your answer. And a lot of people watching will really appreciate the detail that you've gone into there, because clearly, you know, and actually it really is complicated, but clearly if things are done in the right way, especially from an ROI perspective, individuals that come in, you know, they will do well, and then the business will benefit as a result. So clearly, you know, it's mutually beneficial. Yeah, and of course you mentioned there Director of Legal Services for John Lewis for 10 years. How was your time at John Lewis? Because obviously now, you know, the organisation is struggling and has had a few years where really, obviously, clearly the retail sector is massively changing. You know, how was your tenure there?
Had a great legal team, and the business, as you say, was doing really well. Yeah. One of the things that was very interesting to me when I first arrived was that the business didn't have a corporate affairs specialist, and because I'd come from a background in which I'd advised major corporations and businesses that were involved in development, we almost always had some sort of corporate affairs individual that would work with us to talk with government, whether it was central government or local government, about how their policy impacted on the industry that we were working in. And that helps promote your perspective very well. And so one of the things that was very pleasing to me was that the Director of Communications and I made a request for a corporate affairs specialist, public affairs specialist, and we got in a woman, Charlotte Cool, who was amazing. And she and I worked together, supporting the executive chairman, basically to get government to recognise the importance of the model, because it's not the normal equity-based model. The founder had set up a trust, and the business is essentially held on trust for the benefit of the employees. So to that extent, people call it a co-owned business. They're not exactly shareholders, but they benefit from the outcome of the business in terms of getting a bonus. So rather than the dividend being paid to shareholders, the bonus is paid to the employees, so they all have a stake in the outcome, the positive outcome, or indeed the negative outcome, if that was the case. And people would say to me, why are there no other businesses, or there's so few other businesses like John Lewis? And part of the reason was because the legislative background, the Companies Act, is actually basically geared to the equity-based enterprise. It's all about how do we get the best for the shareholder. And so we embarked upon talking to government about the benefits of the John Lewis model. And there was a lovely moment, I remember when I went home to visit my mother, and she said to me, what are you doing at the moment? Because everywhere I go, I read about the John Lewis model. Nick Clegg and David Cameron are always talking about the John Lewis model. And I thought, yes. And I was so delighted. And I thought, yes, it's working. Yeah. And then Charlotte Cool and I and the head of finance worked upon one example to show government how the legislation worked against the model, and if they changed it, they could get more people replicating the model. And I think to an extent that was one of the highlights of my time there, because we wanted to show that even the taxation system worked to the benefit of the equity-based model much better, so that there's a recognition, a tax recognition for dividends paid to shareholders, whereas the bonus paid and the national insurance and so on, for the paid by John Lewis when the bonuses were paid, was taxed in the normal way. The structure operated in the normal way as if it was just part of their salary.
Yeah.
And so we were saying to government, this should be treated, if you treated this in the same way as as shareholders, you recognise some sort of benefit, then the people who receive their money, and these are ordinary people on the shop floor, these are not fat cats, would see a greater benefit from that bonus in their pocket. And what was great was we built up such a rapport with the parliamentary officials, the Treasury, the Department of Trade as it was, DTI as it was, that they listened and they said, okay, what can we do to change the legislation? And they allowed us to work with them to change the legislation to allow a tax benefit on the bonus. And there were people who were saying, well, what about if fat cats decided to change the formation of their business to benefit from that? And we said, well, in that case, just put a cap on it. Yeah. And we suggested £3,000, and they allowed us £5,000 at the time, and that was in 2014. So it was a wonderful moment, because it showed how, if you get involved in the system, you can create systemic change. It also showed that a good model can be recognised, and then we started to work with them on how the governance code ought really to recognise that there are different corporate entities than the ordinary equity-based enterprise. And so, I have to say that my time there was, to some extent, a normal general counsel's journey from, going from private practice into a GC position, which is a bit of a culture shock, to finding ways of actually making a difference, which is really why we're on this planet, frankly. I mean, if you're not going to try to make a difference, what are you here for? So it was an interesting journey. Yeah. And I was really delighted, because I retired in 2014, and it was in 2014 that we got that the legislative change went through, which is wonderful.
Nice way to finish. Yeah, I should come clean to the viewers. As someone that spent 4 years working at Waitrose, I definitely benefited from everything you're talking about. The bonus system was was great. Me and my brother worked at Waitrose, so yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the John Lewis partnership. So I'm now just keen to kind of finish on the higher education sector, if you don't mind. Obviously, you touched upon the fact that you were, in 2017, were appointed chancellor of Coventry University. Obviously, in my mind, the best university. I'm not biased at all, but
it's a wonderful university.
It is. I have nothing but great things to say about Coventry. But so I'm interested to ask you, Margaret. Obviously, clearly, COVID has really changed things for the higher educational space. Going forward, it's going to be a difficult time for universities, because clearly they're going to have to really reinvent the way that degrees are going to be taught to students. Clearly, the notion of having 300 people in a lecture hall, and the university system of trying to get as many students in, because unfortunately that's, I suppose, how the business model works. How do you see, I suppose you can talk about Coventry or just higher education in general, how do you see it changing going forward? Because clearly it's going to have to change, I suppose, moving forward.
It's a good question. The COVID-19 pandemic has sort of catapulted all of us into thinking very, very differently about so many things, but in particular about our digital relationships. One of the amazing things about John Latham as Vice Chancellor is he's very forward thinking, and he and his team are very quick to embrace change and to investigate what's new and find out what should be adopted and trialed. And so that exploration of the digital space as the complement to the lecture hall is something that Coventry did some time ago. the investment has been made. The online tuition has been something that has existed for quite a while. So Coventry is, I think, one of the few universities that wasn't sort of in shock at having to transition more of the learning and the relationships to an online environment. We'd spoken about, the Vice Chancellor and I had spoken about the importance of creating a hinterland of activity online, so that it is not just the tuition, because of course people go to university for so much more than the tuition.
Yeah.
And I think that if any university is well placed to be able to continue with assessing the students, teaching and assessing the students remotely, enabling them to continue and complete their exams, it's Coventry. But as I said earlier, it's catapulted all of the educational establishment to having to think in this way, to think about a mixed model, because as lockdown regulations gradually less stringent, we will be allowed more people on campus. Coventry, I think, even during lockdown, we had something like 5,000 people in our accommodation, and kept staff, colleagues who were on hand to look after them and make sure that they were kept comfortable and safe as possible. And that work continues. So so that to that extent, we were able to accommodate people who, for example, couldn't go home for various reasons. So we've got a sort of nucleus of people with whom we've been working to make sure that their environment is clean, is safe, that there's proper distancing. So that can be widened as more people come through. But the mix, the blended tuition opportunity of the online and the on-campus is going to be something that we will have to embrace for quite a while. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the closed borders, and in particular, we're all sort of waiting quite anxiously to find out what Priti Patel decides to do with regard to allowing people to come in, because I think it's going to take time for people to gain confidence in travelling anyway.
Yeah.
And if they have then to pay for 2 weeks in which they're not actually doing anything as well, that makes travel more expensive and more difficult. So I think we all just have to recognise that all the regulations will just push back the willingness of people to travel. So that makes it very difficult for our overseas students. So a lot of effort will go into trying to make sure that online support is real, and as real as it can be. We also recognise that financially people will be in great difficulty, and so we have a hardship fund, which we've been encouraging alumni to support. So any Coventry alumni watching, do remember your time at university, and if you can help in any way, I'm sure that will be greatly appreciated by the university. We've been preparing, because of course we're a public research university, so we were preparing to meet the Research Excellence Framework requirements, and we were ready, but because of the COVID-19 situation, the assessment has been pushed back, and it's not going to take place as planned. So I don't know what that's going to do to funding, so we're quite concerned about that. So we've got to put measures in place to try to support our PhD students as best they can.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of hope that we can somehow manage to knit together the different areas and levels of support through corporate and foundations. No, it's not easy, but there's a very, very talented group of people within the university that has meant that it's been one of the fastest growing universities in the country. And I think, you will know that it accommodated Greenwich when Greenwich collapsed. And sadly, I think that there will have to be probably some amalgamations of other, not necessarily with us, but other universities amongst themselves, because it's going to be very, very hard for them to subsist, particularly given the paucity of individuals who will be coming from overseas. So many things having to be done to communicate, to accommodate the difficulties of the pandemic and its outcome. But I have a lot of faith in the resilience of people, and one looks at the burn rate of the overheads, and you try to shrink that to make sure that you can afford it in the best way you possibly can. You look at, and I'm not talking necessarily about the university sector, I'm talking about every sector.
Yeah.
And this is what we're all going to have to do. We're all going to have to try and find different ways of making the transition into newly shaped organizations, and then accommodate changes that will help those who have to transition into new jobs, new arrangements, as best we possibly can. And the holidays, the rates holidays, the rental holidays that the government has encouraged are enormously helpful. I don't know the extent to which we can continue all of that without it causing difficulties for both Treasury and landlords and others, local government. But so far that's been enormously helpful. It's not going to be an easy journey, but as I say, I have a lot of faith in the resilience of people in this country, and just the way that John Latham and the team have accommodated changes in the last few years has been so magnificent, and I can't see that they will stop doing so in the impressive way that they have. So I think as long as we can help the government with its own forward planning, I think we'll be all right. I mean, almost the hardest thing has been government's forward planning, and because they're sort of having to do that on the hoof and very much in the public glare. But even there, I mean, there are areas. I mean, if I can go back to some of the demonstrations that we've seen, you will know that we have modules that help with policing, with health and life sciences, and we've got some brilliant innovations, and it would be absolutely wonderful if the new models of policing could be something that Coventry could contribute to in the same way as we have with health and life sciences. And so, again, I'm just really excited about the possibilities for the future because of who we are and the way we've given support to paramedics and the way we've created a health element in all of our science. So we're ahead of the game. We could do the same with policing, and I just think that now's the time.
Yeah, no, completely agree, and hopefully Coventry can lead the way in the way that it's led in so many other areas. So yeah, really, really interesting to hear how Coventry and companies in general have been changing. So thank you very much, Dr. Margaret Casely Hayford. I really appreciate your time. Can we just finish with one final point? So I've been asking all of my guests, I would pluck them into an island, similar to the island behind you. And only take 3 things with you.
Yes.
What would you take?
Now this is unfair because you didn't give me the questions in advance. So this is
it is unfair, but I have to be deliberately,
3 things that I would take with me. I think this is going to sound really ludicrous because it's a sort of classic desert island-esque thing.
Yeah.
But the complete works of Shakespeare would be a joy.
Doesn't sound cool. It sounds like a good thing to bring.
I think for obvious reasons, because of my links to the globe, but also because there is almost not a situation that Shakespeare's writings don't provide for, accommodate, give you thought-provoking ideas about. I mean, it really is just extraordinary. So yeah, complete works of Shakespeare would be great. If I could take my iPad, because that's the equivalent these days of saying, I take my family album, photograph album, because it's just got everything on it as far as I'm concerned in terms of important messages with people that I've worked with, supported, mentored, been taught by, have mentored myself, have been mentored by myself, and it's a sort of patchwork, if you like, not just of photographs but of ideas, and it would be just a joy to have that link. And then, a third one. Is it a desert island?
It is. I mean, it could be a desert island. It could be an island with some, fruit trees on or whatever. But
because you see, when we were young, we used to discuss this around the dining table. My brother Joe would always say it's such a daft list of questions, and in fact, when you read fairy tales and they say, "Oh, you've got 3 wishes," he would say he could never understand why the 3rd wish wasn't, and I would ask for 3 more wishes, please. So, and I just have so much sympathy with that as a solution. So my 3rd wish is for 3 more wishes, please.
You know what? I actually really like that. None of my guests have said that yet. So fine. You can have Shakespeare or the works of Shakespeare. You can have your iPad, and your 3rd thing can be 3 more things, and then I'll let you at some point decide what they would be. Dr. Margaret Casely Hayford, thank you very, very much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me. Thank you. It's been a joy.